September 18th, 1970, Jimi Hendrix dies. I'm still on the football team at that moment, but as soon as I hear about it, I take my helmet off and go back to the gym, confront the coach, and tell him I'm quitting the football team. And in a moment of brilliance, he just gives me one look and says, "Okay." There was a big problem, though. Although I really loved Jimi Hendrix music, and I liked what he was doing, I couldn't play at all, and when I tried, I sounded pretty lousy. So that was really the beginning of years of hard practice and learning about discipline and dedication. But I never lost sight of the initial inspiration of being a listener, listening to Jimi Hendrix records, and then eventually learning about turning that inspiration and that feeling into something that came from within, and using that as sort of a catalyst.
When Joe first played with us, I think it was about a year ago, a gig in Los Angeles, he was very frightened, you know, mostly from the volume, because he plays it a bit lower than we do. My new amplifiers now go to infinity, and I think that idea was very scary to him, because most amplifiers go to 10, but I made the jump to infinity. And when we rehearsed, he did more of this than actual playing, and he said, "Is this what you're going to be doing?" And we said, "Well, yeah."
I started teaching at a real early age. It's really kind of funny. I never thought about teaching guitar until somebody asked me for lessons. And I guess I was just about going on 15. And I had a couple of things under my belt. I could play chords, and I had a pretty decent sense of rhythm. And I knew a lot of tunes. I played in a band, you know, so I knew how to jam with people. But teaching was a whole other thing, because you really had to confront someone else's musical problems, and at the same time you knew that you were working on your own. Teaching guitar while you're learning how to play guitar, that's an interesting thing. Sometimes with students like Steve Vai or Jeff Tyson, these guys were so good and so quick that sometimes I found myself learning something and about 3 weeks later turning it over to the student. And especially, you know, when you're dealing with students who are really, really gifted, you got to do the stuff right, you know, because you don't want to mislead them. And you don't want to discourage them, because if you got a good piece of information and you don't deliver it the right way, you might turn them off to it, you know.
I remember one time he said, all right, you're in a recording studio, they're paying you a lot of money, and it's the mafia, and they've got your sister, and they're going to kill her unless you play something really, really good. And you have to do it in one take. Ready, here you go, and you have to play over this. And he'd start playing a progression. If you didn't do something perfectly, you know, your sister would lose an ear, or she would... you know, she'd get flushed down the toilet or something like that.
Steve Vai was real funny, because when he came to my front door, he had a guitar in one hand without any strings on it, and he had a pack of strings in the other. And he wanted to learn how to play guitar, and he was about this tall. And now he's about this tall, and he can play really great, you know.
I was 13 years old, and my younger sister played guitar, and she had this acoustic guitar, and I was in different bands and stuff playing like keyboards, but we would just pound on the instruments. And the guitar player in the band that I was in wanted to become a better player, and I wanted to take up the guitar because a friend of mine that lived 2 doors down from my house played guitar, and I asked him who his teacher was, and he said, this guy, Joe Satriani. and my friend that I was in the band with, we couldn't really afford to take lessons, so we went together and chipped in $2.50 each for the $5 that Joe was charging for his lesson. And I remember the first time I went, I had this guitar that I bought from a friend of mine for $5, and all I had was the guitar without any strings and a pack of strings. I didn't even know how to put the strings on the guitar. Everything about him was musical. I mean, you went into his room and there was music posters, and he had a cool amp, you know, one of those custom amps with the foam on it and a curly cord, and that stuff was like, wow. He was very strict with his lessons and stuff. You know, if I didn't learn something, I had to learn it again. You know, and so I learned theory, and I learned a lot of good techniques, and it's not so surprising that a lot of the stuff that I play, or we sound similar in a sense, because I mean he essentially, I cut my teeth with him.
To a studio with a friend of mine and recorded an EP's worth of tunes. And the weird thing about it was I just used a guitar, electric guitar, and didn't use a bass or drums or anything like that. But I used the guitar for lots of things. Like I use Allen wrenches on the pickups for kick drums, and I'd use different kinds of strumming techniques to sort of take the place of that hi-hat energy or snare energy that you get from drums, and detune the strings to get good bass tones, and basically just made a sort of a mad record. And I couldn't sell these things, and I could barely give them away, but it was sort of a funny little thing because people started to recognize what I was doing with that little EP.
Well, sound and technique obviously are two different things. He has got both. I have volume.
This is MTV Unplugged. We're back. And this is Joe Satriani and his friend Jonathan Mover. They're going to do an instrumental called The Feeling.
Virtuosity, popularity, and pure respect are the criteria. There's no question that Joe Satriani is a guitar hero. I've heard about these guys before. I don't trust them.
of fact, I used to write all these little blues tunes, and a friend of mine, John Riccio, his guitar player that sort of took me under his wing, used to number them because I never used to have names for these little boogie tunes. So he used to call them Satch Boogie 1, Satch Boogie 2, and stuff like that. That's how I eventually came up with that song, Satch Boogie. It was probably number 236 or something like that, you know.